San Diego takes another step toward expanding its downtown convention center, and a 14-year-old North County murder case could be headed back to court. Hello, good evening. I'm Dwayne Brown. Those stories are coming up on KPBS Evening Edition.
And I'm Peggy Pico. Coming up, voters in 4 local neighborhoods will soon decide if they want medical marijuana dispensaries in their neighborhood. We'll explain the ballot measures and the potential legal issues if they pass. Then, California Assemblyman Nathan Fletcher talks about the urgent need for civility and respect in political discourse. Evening Edition starts now.
KPBS Evening Edition is made possible by Joan and Irwin Jacobs and by
Today, San Diego City Council voted to move forward with the Convention Center expansion, approving the project's environmental impact report, financing plan, and the developer. City leaders say the Convention Center expansion would make San Diego more attractive to larger conventions and would also generate millions for the economy. The $520 million project would add more than 200,000 square feet of exhibit space.
Realistic metrics show that this Convention Center expansion project will more than pay for itself by generating tax revenues, creating jobs, and spurring private development by attracting more convention and more tourism into the local economy.
This is an exciting day for me. 3 years later, 19 public meetings during the task force, 22 or 23, haven't counted it exactly, governmental hearings. This is the, hopefully, finale of that for me. At the end of the day, if you were a baseball team, this means every single time you went up to bat, you had to hit a home run. Because if we didn't make any one of these, if we didn't get approval, the project would have stopped.
But the game isn't over yet. The Coastal Commission must still weigh in, and a judge has yet to consider whether the city's financing plan is legal. There's a candlelight vigil tonight in memory of a woman shot to death by a Border Patrol agent last week. 32-year-old Valerie Monique Alvarado was shot after she allegedly rammed the agent with her car. It happened Friday in Chula Vista. The agent was not in uniform, but serving an arrest warrant on another person who hasn't been identified. Alvarado's family says she was an innocent victim and is demanding a full explanation. Border Patrol has not commented. Fire investigators say target shooting caused last week's deadly blaze near the Campo Indian Reservation. The Shockey fire destroyed 11 homes in the East County and killed one man who refused to leave his home. Investigators are trying to find out who was target shooting near Shockey Truck Trail when the fire started. There could be a new trial in a 14-year-old North County murder case because of a decision today by the U.S. Supreme Court. Joining us from the News Center is KPBS senior news editor Mark Sauer. Mark, give us some background on this case.
Well, a mentally ill drifter named Richard Tewitt was convicted in 2004 of involuntary manslaughter in the stabbing of 12-year-old Stephanie Crow. He was finally brought to trial after Escondido police had wrongly focused on Stephanie's 14-year-old brother Michael and 2 of his friends. Now he's set to get a new trial.
So why is Tewitt up for a new trial?
Well, Tewitt's attorney was successful with a 3-judge panel of the federal Ninth Circuit in arguing he did not get a fair trial. A prosecution witness who sent a letter criticizing a defense expert was not cross-examined. And the appellate judges ruled 2-1 to overturn Tewitt's conviction, and state prosecutors were hopeful the U.S. Supreme Court would overrule that decision and reinstate it, but the High Court today declined without comment to do that.
And so what happens now?
Tewitt is entitled to a new trial, but the first one took 4 months, so it could be prosecutors will simply decide not to retry the case and release him after roughly 8 years served of a 17-year prison sentence. Meanwhile, the Crow family last year collected more than $7 million in a civil settlement against Escondido police and others, and a judge earlier this year declared Michael Crow factually innocent in his sister's killing.
KPBS senior news editor Mark Sauer. The High Court also turned down an appeal in another San Diego murder case. Former lab worker Kristen Rossum said she deserved a new trial because her trial lawyer performed poorly. She was convicted of poisoning her husband a decade ago. The owner of UT San Diego finalized his purchase of the North County Times today. Publisher Doug Manchester says the UT will deliver a North County product combining the best of both papers. The merger comes with pink slips. 80 North County Times staffers received a 60-day layoff notice. SeaWorld says an injured killer whale is starting to regrow tissue to a wound on his lower jaw. Last week we told you about this. An animal rights group released a graphic photo of the orca named Nakai. It shows a chunk missing from his jaw. SeaWorld says he was hurt after normal social behavior with two other killer whales, but People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, says Nakai was attacked. The group wants the U.S. Department of Agriculture to investigate. California is the first state to ban psychotherapy aimed at making gay teenagers straight. Governor Jerry Brown signed the bill saying conversion therapy has no basis in science or medicine. A conservative group says it's getting ready to sue over the law, claiming it will harm children. The governor also signed a bill allowing driver's licenses for some illegal immigrants. It applies to young immigrants who are eligible for work permits under a new federal policy. But Brown vetoed a bill to protect illegal immigrants from deportation. The Trust Act would have limited cooperation between police and federal agents, with an exception for suspects in serious crimes. Governor Brown says the bill was flawed because it omitted many serious crimes. There's been plenty of name-calling and mudslinging attacks in the San Diego mayor's race. Peggy Pico talks with former candidate Nathan Fletcher about his push for civility in politics.
Nathan, you're on a panel on Wednesday at USD to talk about civility and respect in politics, something that seems to be missing in today's environment. Is that the reason you became an independent?
Well, it played a significant role. It wasn't just the civility. I mean, politics has always been tough. You know, in the late 1790s, William Wilberforce was a British member of Parliament trying to end the slave trade, and his opponents distributed flyers throughout the British Empire that said that he beat his wife. The only problem was he had never been married. So politics have always been rough. There's always been unsavory characters. My frustration as it relates to civility is a lack of willingness to say we can sit down and negotiate in good faith, that we may view things differently, but we have a common good, which is advancing our city or state or country. And that's what I really think we're missing. You know, in 1983, you know, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill had the ability to sit down and to save Social Security. And Tip O'Neill said we're going to cut benefits, and Ronald Reagan said we're going to raise taxes. But they did the right thing for the country, and that's what I really think is missing today.
Do you think it's better or worse today than it?
I think it's worse. I mean, I've talked to a lot of folks that were around in previous decades, and I said, compare and contrast. Is it just the way it's always been and we complain about it more? And they said elections have always been tough, and there's always been the rough and tumble of politics. But what there used to be was a basic belief, an optimism, a hope that we can solve these problems. We can fund our schools. We can create jobs. We can build infrastructure. And there was a willingness of Republicans and Democrats to sit down and work it out and come to an agreement. And what I think you see now is a campaign that exists not to put people in place to enact good policies, but a campaign that exists to perpetuate a campaign. And that really gets done by really driving people to the ideological extremes and really punishing those that actually sit down and work in good faith for solutions. Let's
take a look at a campaign ad that you ran during your mayoral candidacy where you talk about red and blue.
Blue is better. Red is better. No, blue is
better. Red is better. If you're tired of partisan politics, vote Nathan Fletcher for mayor. He's not a Democrat, he's not a Republican, he's an American.
No red, no blue, purple instead. But you've also talked about politics not being black or white. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is you've got to have the willingness and ability. You learn a lot when you sit down with someone who has a different life experience, maybe comes from a different political party and has a different perspective. But that requires you actually sitting down. And I believe in my heart that everyone that runs for office runs with the best of intentions. They want to solve problems. They want to make the world a better place. We may disagree on how we do it, but you got to have that willingness to sit down and negotiate in good faith. You know, I sat down with Governor Jerry Brown and we negotiated closing a tax loophole that would raise taxes by $1 billion, but we were going to provide relief to businesses. It was the right thing to do. And in an ideologically driven world, the far right will say it's bad, the far left will say it's bad. The people that say it's good is a small business owner who's trying to actually hire someone. And that's what I think we need is people that have the strength and courage of convictions to step out of their comfort zone and buck their own party if they believe it's the right thing to do. And that's missing today.
And what about the voters? How can should they, first of all, listen to opposing party views? And if so, how should they be better informed?
Well, I think what we'd like to see from the voters is calling on elected officials to solve problems. Calling on them to actually confront these challenges, calling on them to have an ability to work together. And you're going to have to make some difficult decisions. And there's not easy solutions, and everyone doesn't get in a room and just hold hands and say it's great. But we have the ability to confront these problems, and I think elected officials need to have the comfort that the public wants them to make difficult decisions, wants them to get it done. And I think it's there. I think we need elected officials to step up a little bit more.
We're competitive by nature. Of course we are. Isn't it something along the lines of, I want my team to win? And so maybe I don't like either mayoral candidate, but I want my team to win, so I'm going to vote for this guy even though I don't like him.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of democracy. And we should have robust debates. People should highlight the differences between candidates. They should say, you know, you're seeing it in the presidential race. You know, we're having a real debate about taxation and who should pay and what it should fund and where it should go, and there's clear differences between the two. What I care more about is this notion that when the election's over, the election's over. And the purpose of the election was not to perpetuate one party's dominance or to set up the next election. The purpose of the election was to put in leaders who will now set aside their differences and do what's best for the country. And that's what I believe is missing. Bob Woodward's got a book out, The Price of Politics, right now, which walks through in Washington, D.C., the debt ceiling increase and the inability of both sides to make reasonable compromise. To come together to acknowledge, hey, this may not be what my party wants me to do, but it's what my country should expect of me. And there was a period of, you know, an era with President Kennedy where he was able to work with Republicans. I mentioned President Reagan earlier, where these types of things happen. And I think we just need to return to that a little more.
Okay, California Assemblyman Nathan Fletcher, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Tonight at 8, KPBS will host a live mayoral debate. Join us as we discuss the issues most important to San Diego and what Carl DeMaio and Bob Filner say they'll do if elected mayor. Election 2012, the race for mayor tonight at 8 o'clock on KPBS television and radio. Medical marijuana has been legal in California since 1996, but in San Diego County, many patients are having trouble getting their hands on it. That's because all the storefronts selling it have been effectively shut down. Now, activists in 4 cities have gotten measures on the November ballot to support dispensaries. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg tells us even if the measures win, patients might ultimately lose.
Vay Linville has severe emphysema. He needs bottled oxygen to survive. When Linville was first diagnosed, doctors told him without a double lung transplant, he'd soon be dead. Linville got his affairs in order. Then, one day, when he was searching on the internet, he discovered a treatment for breathing problems that used to be widely prescribed in the 1800s, tincture of cannabis. Linville found a recipe for it and decided to make it himself.
I went out and joined one of the clubs, one of the dispensaries, and was able to buy approximately a quarter pound of concentrates that I put in a small amount of alcohol and consumed over about 10 weeks. And instead of dying as expected, here I am 6 years later, doing better and better.
These days, Linville uses just a few drops of the tincture in his tea. But getting any amount of marijuana is difficult because nearly all local dispensaries have been closed. Linville says that puts him in a tough spot.
It's immoral to make me choose between suffocating and doing business with a drug dealer. This is not a choice that the patient should be faced with. It's wrong.
Linville is with the group Americans for Safe Access. With the help of some local activists, they've placed a measure on the November ballot in Imperial Beach. That's a town where Linville grew up. Prop S would repeal Imperial Beach's ban on medical marijuana dispensaries. It would allow dispensaries to operate under specific zoning and operational requirements. Imperial Beach business owner Marcus Boyd is one of the driving forces behind Prop S. Boyd became an advocate back in 2008 when his sister was dying in a local convalescent home. Boyd says marijuana helped relieve her pain. One night, she asked staff for a joint. She wanted them to call Boyd to get one for her.
They laughed, and a couple hours later, she passed away. When I found that out the next morning by going there, I made a commitment to myself and to her that I would make sure that people in need are able to find medicine when they need it.
Boyd says Prop S adheres to state guidelines and adds 19 other restrictions to protect patients and the community.
They would require lighting both inside and outside, sufficient so that the mandatory surveillance cameras, both inside and outside, would be able to clearly determine who somebody is at 40 feet away. That's more security, I think, than any location in Imperial Beach.
The measure would also restrict operating hours and prohibit dispensaries within 600 feet of a school or playground. Nonetheless, Imperial Beach Mayor Jim Janney and the majority of the city council are against it. Janney's not opposed to medical marijuana per se. He thinks patients should be able to get it. But Janney says the authors of Prop S went overboard.
If it was as simple as say, I want to allow for 3 storefronts in Imperial Beach, they would have said that. But they didn't do that. We could have up to 19 or 20 of them or more, depending on how you locate them. I think that's way too far. And I don't think that that was good law. I don't think that's really the way it should work.
Imperial Beach voters won't be the only ones in November to decide whether to allow dispensaries in their town. Voters in Solana Beach, Del Mar, and Lemon Grove will also weigh in.
But even if these measures pass, there are no guarantees that any medical marijuana dispensaries will be allowed to operate.
That's because U.S. Attorney Laura Duffy has been aggressive in enforcing the federal ban on marijuana. Working with the DEA and local law enforcement, she's led the way in forcing local dispensaries to shut down. Duffy has gone even further. In July, she sent a letter to the city attorney in Del Mar. The letter said city employees who conducted activities mandated by their dispensary ordinance would not be immune from federal prosecution. Duffy wouldn't agree to be interviewed for this story. Despite the feds' position, Vay Linville says there are tens of thousands of sick people in San Diego County who could benefit from medical marijuana.
People with AIDS, people with cancer that really are entitled to safe access to this medicine as they would be to any other.
KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg. Encinitas voters in the North County will get a chance to approve medical marijuana dispensaries in 2014.
Recently, we've seen federal agents shut down San Diego County's last medical marijuana dispensary. Alex Krait, former chair of the city's medical marijuana task force and associate professor of law at Thomas Jefferson School of Law, joins me to talk about the new ballot measures. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
What is different about these ballot initiatives, or are they?
I think that these ballot initiatives really aren't that much different from what exists in a lot of the state. These measures are modeled after existing ordinances in other parts of California that have worked well, that have proven to be successful at regulating medical marijuana dispensaries. I think what's unusual is that we just don't have a lot of these ordinances here in San Diego County.
So there's 4 on the November ballot: Solana Beach, Del Mar, Lemon Grove, Imperial Beach. 4 towns that are going to vote on medical marijuana dispensaries in their neighborhood. Are all those initiatives the same? Were they written by the same person?
Yeah, these initiatives are backed by the same organization, so they're all very, very similar in terms of how they go about regulating medical marijuana dispensaries. They, aim to have sort of strict regulations and controls to balance the interests of the community and medical marijuana patients, although obviously whether they're strict enough is in the eye of the beholder.
Why these 4 particular towns? Is there any similarities, or was it just a coincidence?
I think it was probably just where they probably had the most momentum in getting the ordinances together. I suspect that they would be interested in doing similar measures in other parts of San Diego in the future, and this is just where it came together this year. U.S.
Attorney Laura Duffy has pushed to get these dispensaries shut down. So if these propositions pass here, won't the feds just come in and say, close them?
Yeah, well, I think the federal government, if they keep doing what they're doing, it does seem like they, are going to keep going after dispensaries. But if you look at other parts of the state where they have ordinances like this, the federal officials have been less successful at shutting down all of the dispensaries because there's clear rules of the road at the local level. So I think that these ordinances would make it tougher for federal officials to succeed in shutting down all the dispensaries.
One complaint that's commonly heard about these medical marijuana dispensaries is that people are using them illegally to get an illegal high, that these aren't really to help patients who are in pain. You've done a lot on reporting on this and sort of investigating on this. What does the data show?
Yeah, I think that there's not a lot of clear data about, how many people are abusing the system. But I think the thing to always remember is that this is a problem with all medicines, all prescription drugs. There is abuse. And I think that, society usually looks at it and balances it and says, yeah, abuse is something that we should look at and try and stop. But the answer can never be to deny legitimate patients access to the medicine that they need. So I think it's something to look at and say, how can we limit the abuses of people who don't really have a legitimate medical need? But I think looking at it and saying, well, there's abuse, so we should deny legitimate patients access is not really the right balance.
How aggressive is local law enforcement on going after people who are using medical marijuana?
Well, I think that's been the difference between San Diego County and a lot of other parts of the state, and why here in San Diego there aren't any dispensaries anymore, is that the district attorney's office here has been very vigilant in going after medical marijuana dispensaries. They've taken an incredibly restrictive view of what state law says that's different from what prosecutors in most other parts of the state have put forward. And in fact, in a couple weeks, there's going to be an oral argument, appellate oral argument in the California State Court that's going to test the San Diego District Attorney's interpretation of the state law. So I think that's a difference between what we see here and other parts of California.
If these measures pass, would city officials or the city workers themselves who've licensed these dispensaries, would they be liable?
No, and it's funny because there's been, I think, some effort to create that impression, but the fact is that these ordinances really just require city employees to implement a licensing permitting scheme. It's something that exists all across the state of California and in other states, Colorado, Arizona, and there's really no legal theory to say that issuing a business permit somehow is a federal offense.
All right, Alex Krait, we're out of time, professor of Thomas Jefferson School of Law. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
City Heights neighbors say they need more parks, but until it happens, they have another solution using vacant lots. We get the story tonight from the Media Arts Center.
It's kind of like trying to take back the either empty or spaces that they turn into parking lots and stuff and using it for a community space. If kids had a safe place to do things that were fun and proactive and where they could just have a community with their peers, they would be less likely to be roaming around or getting into trouble. I mean, Parking Day is actually kind of a nationwide, a global event, sort of a movement to take back certain spaces that different communities feel could be utilized better. To build community, not just with kids, but parents, teachers, everyone have some place to go where you can just chill out, or you talk about your day, or eat together, or hang out. There's a youth council group in Mid-City Can, and they're actually trying to open a skate park in City Heights, where the community center and the library is, like right behind that, by the fields and everything. So I know a lot of these kids are a part of that youth group, and I think they just brought their skate stuff to have fun and show, you know, like what they would be doing if they could have their skate park.
There's more stuff to do instead of just skating flat ground the whole day. Yeah, but it's actually pretty fun.
Everything doesn't have to be a business. Like sometimes it's just nice to have open space to be able to interact.
A slice of life from City Heights, produced by Brian Myers of the Media Arts Center. You'll find more online at speakcityheights.org. Recapping tonight's top stories, City Council has voted to move forward with the Convention Center expansion, approving the project's environmental impact report, financing plan, as well as developers. City leaders say the expansion would make San Diego more attractive to larger conventions and would also generate millions for the economy. And the family of a woman killed by a Border Patrol agent is demanding answers tonight. 32-year-old Valerie Monique Alvarado was shot after she allegedly ran the agent with her car. It happened Friday in Chula Vista. The agent was not in uniform, but serving an arrest warrant on another person. Alvarado's family says she was an innocent victim and is demanding a full explanation. Border Patrol has not commented. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.